What if the memory loss so many seniors face wasn't just a sign of aging? What if behind those lapses, those memories that seem to dissolve into thin air, something much bigger was happening, something that goes beyond biology, beyond what medicine can explain? Dolores Cannon, a tireless researcher of consciousness, dared to propose a hypothesis that, to many, sounds almost like a whisper from the unseen. Perhaps memory doesn't just fade away. Perhaps it is, in fact, carefully stored, while his soul resets a part of itself. Think for a moment. How many times have you heard stories of parents or grandparents who, as the years passed, began to forget names, dates, even significant life events? Sometimes they get lost in familiar hallways, call grandchildren by other names, leave coffee on the stove and forget to turn it off. But at other times, something unexpected happens. They recall in detail a smell from childhood, a forgotten face from decades ago, an old song they thought was gone. It's as if memory, instead of fading, reorganizes itself. Dolores Cannon called this a spiritual reset, a turning point that precedes a new chapter. Dolores worked for over 40 years with deep regressions. She led thousands of people into expanded states of consciousness, where she claimed the boundaries between lives, memories, and spiritual planes dissolved. It was there, listening to stories that didn't seem to come from the conscious mind, that she noticed a pattern. Seniors who were losing their memory in this life seemed, in regression, to be transferring files to something greater. It wasn't forgetting, she said. It was a type of soul backup. Imagine an old computer full of files. Some heavy, some corrupted, others precious. There comes a time when it needs to be rebooted to keep working, not because it's broken, but because it's making space for something new. According to Dolores, the same thing happens with the human mind at certain stages of old age. Memories begin to go out of focus, not because they cease to exist, but because they are being sent to a deeper level, inaccessible to the conscious mind, yet safe in what she called the higher consciousness. That might sound comforting, doesn't it? But it also raises another question. Why then is this process so painful for those who witness it? Why do children and grandchildren suffer so much seeing someone they love forget a birthday or even their own name? Dolores said there's a hidden reason, one that is rarely spoken about. What hurts those who remain is the loss of recognition, but for those going through the process, there is often a strange peace. She told the story of a lady named Eleanor, 84 years old, who participated in one of her sessions. In recent years, Eleanor had lost almost all her recent memories. She'd forget to eat lunch, wouldn't recognize the house she'd lived in for decades. But during the regression, something extraordinary happened. Eleanor began to speak of a place where she was storing everything. "I see boxes of light," she said. "I'm putting the memories there. They're not going away. They're just going home." That phrase struck Dolores because, she said, it described exactly what happens. Memory doesn't fade. It goes home. This home, she explained, isn't a physical place but a state of the soul, like an invisible safe where every hug, every word, and every sorrow remain intact, waiting for the right moment to be accessed again. This changes everything, doesn't it? Because suddenly forgetting ceases to be an end and becomes a transition. But that wasn't the most surprising part of Dolores's discoveries. She realized that in many ancient cultures, this phenomenon was already intuited. Eastern peoples, for example, believed that before death, the soul went through a gradual detachment from the body and mind. It was as if, little by little, the threads that bound it to the physical world were being released, and one of the most visible signs of this process was memory loss. Not as a punishment, but as a loosening of ties. Think about it. Could it be that memory, when it starts to fail, is merely releasing the ties that bind us to what has passed? Could it be that, by forgetting what was, the soul is preparing for what is to come? Dolores Cannon believed so, and her words echo to this day. It is not a disease of the soul, she would say. It is a cleansing, a reset, something as ancient as life itself. But there's something even more intriguing. Dolores noticed that some specific memories, usually connected to childhood or moments of great love, remained intact until the very end, as if the soul was saying, "This I need to take with me." The rest, little by little, was being archived. This raises a powerful question. Could what we remember until the last moment reveal what truly matters to the soul? This idea opens a space for deep reflection. Because if it's true, perhaps the last flashes of memory of a senior are in fact clues to what they consider most precious, not what the mind, but what the soul has decided to carry to the other side. And so, we arrive at a delicate point. Because if memory loss is a spiritual reset, how do we deal with the human, practical, and painful side of this process? Dolores said the first step was to change the question. Instead of "why are they forgetting?" ask, "what is being released? What is being stored?" This change in perspective, simple yet profound, transformed the way family members viewed their loved ones. But what if? The soul's reset wasn't just about forgetting, but about preparing to remember something even greater. Dolores Cannon used to say that human memory is like a vast ocean. What we consciously remember is just the surface, those small waves that shimmer in the sun. But beneath that surface, there's an enormous depth, where memories of all lives, of all experiences, rest in silence. She believed that when a senior begins to forget, it's not because the ocean is drying up, but because the soul is diving deeper, seeking something that we from the outside cannot see. That image is powerful, isn't it? Because it makes us realize that perhaps forgetting isn't emptiness, but too much fullness to fit into the waking mind. Dolores reported that in many regression sessions, her patients, including seniors, described a sensation of going to the bottom. Some said it was like entering a dream, others spoke of a room full of light. But all agreed on one thing: there was no fear. "It's like coming home after a long journey," said a 79-year-old man who in daily life could barely remember his children's names. This brings up an important point. Forgetting can be painful for the observer, but often it's more peaceful than we imagine for those going through it. Dolores used to say, "The mind struggles, the soul surrenders." And it is this surrender that creates the feeling of confusion out here, but inside, within the senior, something greater is happening. She also warned against a common misconception, confusing this soul reset with diseases like Alzheimer's. Of course, medical, genetic, neurological conditions exist, and that cannot be ignored. But Dolores urged us to look beyond. Even within illness, there is a spiritual journey, she said, and she told cases where people with Alzheimer's in regression brought forth information so lucid, so coherent, that it was impossible not to wonder, could forgetting merely be a part of something much larger? Dolores believed that when the soul begins to reset, it performs a triage. Some memories are released, others are archived. It's as if the whole life is reorganized on an invisible timeline. What is heavy, what was trauma, deep pain, that gets switched off. Not because it ceases to exist, but because, she said, the soul decides, "I don't need to carry this anymore." Imagine this scene. An elderly person sitting on the edge of the bed, staring into space. From the outside, they seem lost. But, in Dolores's view, they are busy, very busy. They are packing their bags before a long journey. They pick up a moment of happiness, fold it carefully and put it away. They pick up an old sorrow, sigh, and leave it behind. And, in this silent process, everyday words escape. Keys are forgotten. Coffee gets cold. Because the focus is no longer on the world. It's on this internal sorting. And here comes something fascinating. In some sessions, Dolores noticed that during this reset, many seniors accessed memories from other lives. Yes, while forgetting details of this one, they remembered stories they had never told, names they had never heard in this incarnation. She would say, "It's as if the door of the conscious mind closes, but another door, that of the deep unconscious, opens." This leads us to an almost inevitable reflection. Could forgetting not be in a way a diversion of the mind so that the soul can look at a larger map? Dolores asserted that when memory fails, the soul can finally listen. Listen to whom? Listen to what? She said it was the time when spiritual guides, memories from past lives, even promises made before birth, began to manifest. But why then don't we consciously remember everything? Why don't we receive these revelations clearly, like a conversation? Dolores had a simple yet profound answer, because the body and mind couldn't bear it. For her, memory loss was a gentle way for the soul to say, I'm going to turn down the surface noise a bit, so I can do the work I need to do deep down. And there's a detail she repeated often, almost as a warning. Never underestimate what an elderly person in silence is experiencing. Dolores said that behind that gaze that seems lost, a sacred process is often unfolding. What we see as confusion may, in fact, be contemplation. What seems like absence may be a deep dialogue with something we do not see. But this brings up another sensitive point. What about the pain of those who love them? How do you tell a child, a grandchild, that this forgetting doesn't mean abandonment? Dolores often suggested an exercise. Instead of asking, do you remember me? Say, I remember you. She said that this simple change reversed the pressure. The elderly person stopped feeling the demand to prove memory, and often serenity returned to their eyes. One of the most moving accounts Dolores shared was that of a granddaughter named Caroline, who cared for her grandfather with Alzheimer's. She entered a hypnosis session with him, and at one point the man, who couldn't even remember his own daughter's name, held Caroline's hand and said, I may not remember your name, but I remember the love. Dolores cried when she told this story, because for her it proved that the essence is not lost. Superficial memory may dissolve, but what is essential, the soul holds firm. This leads us to a new understanding. Memory loss can indeed be a reset, but not an empty reset. It's a reset so the soul can remember what truly matters. And here comes one of Dolores Cannon's most quoted phrases, you are not what you remember. You are what your soul never forgets. Think about that. If our identity isn't just in what we consciously retain, but in what, even without realizing it, we carry from life to life, then memory loss doesn't destroy who we are. It merely changes the way we recognize ourselves. But there's an even greater mystery, which Dolores only began to touch upon in her later years of research. What if memory loss, this reset, wasn't just to prepare the soul to depart, but so that it could, here and now, access something new? Dolores Cannon used to say that the soul's reset isn't a passive process. It's not just the mind slowly shutting down. It is, in fact, a deliberate movement, almost like a preparation for a leap. She explained that after this reset, the soul is freer to access information that was previously blocked by the noise of daily life, by the burden of memories that occupied the conscious mind. In her sessions, Dolores saw a pattern. After the cleansing, something new and surprising began to emerge. Imagine a blackboard full of old words, scribbles, numbers. Eventually, there's no more room for anything new. You need to use the eraser not to destroy what was written, but to make space for new notes. Dolores believed that forgetting in the final years of life is that eraser, and when the board is clean, the soul begins to write. Something new, something that might be so subtle few notice, but which is there, present. She told the story of a man named Thomas, 86 years old. He no longer remembered most of his life, but in moments of lucidity, he would say phrases no one understood. I know where I'm going, he'd say, smiling as he looked out the window. During a session with Dolores, Thomas said something even more intriguing. What I forgot opened a door, and what I see through that door is peace. For Dolores, Thomas described exactly what happens after the soul resets. It approaches a state of expanded consciousness, where the fear of death diminishes and a kind of profound serenity takes its place. This doesn't mean all seniors feel this clearly. Many can't put it into words, but she said that on some level this process is occurring, and here comes one of the most delicate and at the same time comforting ideas from Dolores's work. She believed that this reset not only serves the one who is departing, it also serves those who remain. Forgetting forces others to love in a new way, she'd say. That's powerful, isn't it? Because when a senior stops remembering the names of their children or forgets the social roles they carried throughout their life, love stops being about roles, titles, and memories. It becomes a pure, almost childlike love, the love of being present, of holding a hand, of smiling for no reason. But what happens to the soul at this stage? Dolores said that after the cleansing is complete, the soul begins to remember who it truly is. It's a paradox. The person forgets who they were here, but the soul remembers who it always was. Often this manifests in small phrases, in deep glances, in moments when, for an instant, the senior seems to return and say something that doesn't make immediate sense, but carries impressive wisdom. Dolores also observed something curious. Some people, even with advanced memory loss, showed moments of insight, brief flashes where they would say things like, "It's all right, I'm ready, I've seen this place before." She believed these moments weren't neurological accidents, but instances where the soul, freed from the weight of memories, could speak more loudly. This raises a question. Could it be that, by losing memories, the senior is gaining something we don't see? Dolores affirmed yes. They are not empty. They are full of a silence that teaches, she'd say. And this silence is uncomfortable for observers, because we are accustomed to measuring life by what is remembered, said, recorded. But perhaps the soul measures in another way. A touching detail is how Dolores viewed the role of family members in this process. She said that the soul's reset is an invitation for those around to learn to communicate differently. When memory fails, the heart speaks louder, she asserted. This means that gestures, glances, touches, all of these become more important than rational conversation. She told the story of Margaret, a caregiver who worked with seniors for decades. Margaret said that over time, she learned to recognize the language of silence. They forget words, she'd say, but they don't forget how they feel when you hold their hand. Dolores loved to quote this phrase in her lectures because she believed it summarized the essence of the reset. The soul sheds the excess of words and leaves only what matters: emotion, connection. There is also another aspect that Dolores explored with courage. What if this reset wasn't just to prepare for departure, but to allow the soul, while still alive, to glimpse the other side? She said that many seniors, after memory loss, described vivid dreams, encounters with deceased loved ones, sensations of already being there. And according to her, these accounts weren't just mental confusion, they were glimpses. Dolores claimed that memory loss creates a liminal state, a space between worlds. It is no longer full life, but it is not yet death. It is an in-between place. And in this in-between place, the soul begins to acclimatize to what is to come. She described this with a phrase that became famous among her followers. The soul begins to check in even before the luggage arrives. But there's something even deeper. Dolores believed that by clearing memories, the soul is teaching us something about what is truly worth keeping. Think, how many memories do we carry that weigh us down? Regrets, resentments, hurts. She said that if forgetting in the final years is a cleansing, perhaps it's a reminder that one day we will all have to leave these memories behind, and that the ideal would be to start sooner. This thought, though uncomfortable, is liberating, because if we know that one day all of this will be reset, we can choose right now what we want the soul to keep. However, there's still a piece of the puzzle missing. If the soul resets, what happens next? Dolores believed that the reset doesn't end with death. It is, in fact, the prelude to something greater, a new beginning so vast that the human mind can barely imagine it. And this brings us to the most decisive moment in the narrative. Because understanding what happens after the reset changes the way we see old age, memory loss, and even death. Dolores Cannon used to say that death, for the soul, isn't a wall, it's a door. And that memory loss, that forgetting so many fear, is just the hand slowly pushing that door open, preparing the way. But what exists on the other side? What happens after the soul resets? In many of her sessions, Dolores heard impressive accounts from people in deep trance states who described what they saw when the greater memory began to open. These weren't ordinary recollections. They were images of fields of light, encounters with deceased family members, sensations of indescribable welcome. One patient said, "I'm forgetting here, because I'm starting to remember there." That phrase profoundly affected her, because for her it summarized the mystery of the reset. It's not about losing memory, but about exchanging one type of remembrance for another. She explained that the soul, as it approaches the end of an incarnation, needs to detach from the weight of the life it is leaving. Memories of pain, conflicts, even earthly victories, all of this needs to be put in order, like books on a shelf that will no longer be used, so that it can carry only the essence. Dolores would say, the soul doesn't take the whole story. It takes the learning, the love, the transformation. This completely changes how we view forgetting, because if we believe this, memory loss isn't a collapse, but a selection. It's the soul choosing what it will carry to the next stage. She told the story of Helen, a 90-year-old woman who, after years of lapses and confusion, had a moment of lucidity minutes before she passed away. She held her daughter's hand and said, "Don't worry, I kept what matters." Then she smiled and left. Dolores said this type of account was common, and that for her it confirmed her theory. The soul doesn't forget what is essential. And what happens when this reset is complete? Dolores described how the soul, free from the binds of the conscious mind, experiences something like an awakening. It's like waking from a long, confusing dream and suddenly remembering who you truly are. Many of her patients in trance describe death not as an end, but as a remembering of oneself. This idea is deeply comforting for senior audiences, because it transforms the fear of forgetting into something gentler, almost sacred. Dolores would say, if you lose your memory, know this: you are not lost. You are finding yourself. She also spoke of something she called the final surrender. It's the moment when the soul, already free of the memories that tied it to the world, completely accepts the transition. It's like leaving your coat at the entrance and stepping into your home, she'd say. And for her, this moment was so gentle that many seniors described it as a good sleep, a deep rest. But there's a question many families ask. What can we do while we watch this process? Dolores responded with tenderness. Be present. Even when they don't remember who you are, they feel who you are. Touch, tone of voice, patience, all of this speaks directly to the soul, even when the mind no longer comprehends. She reminded us that the final years, even marked by forgetting, can be one of the most significant periods of a life, because in them often a type of love emerges that depends on nothing, neither memories, nor recognition, nor shared stories. It is a love for the pure being that is there, stripped of titles, of the past, of ego. And that is what the reset invites us to see. Dolores would say, when memory fades, essence remains, and essence is always love. At the end of her life, she summarized all her work in a phrase that echoes as a legacy. Don't be afraid to forget. What is real, you will never lose. And perhaps this is the deepest comfort we can offer to those watching a parent, a mother, a grandparent go through this process. Forgetting may seem like a thief, but according to Dolores, it's just a gardener, clearing the ground for something new to blossom. So, when an elderly person looks at you and doesn't remember your name, remember, their soul still knows who you are. When they forget the birthday, the story, the conversation, know that love, the kind that never fades, is still there. If you've made it this far, perhaps this perspective has changed the way you view memory loss. Perhaps the next time you see someone forgetting, you'll take a deep breath and think, they are not fading away, they are preparing. And if this reflection brought peace to your heart, consider subscribing to the channel, because there are many other mysteries that deserve to be explored together, calmly, respectfully, with depth. And before concluding, one last invitation. Share this video with someone you love. Because in the end, talking about the soul's reset isn't to scare. It's to remind all of us of something essential, that the journey doesn't end with forgetting. It in fact begins anew,